Now, the next question is for Eric and Chris, so you're going to both get a crack at this one. So generally speaking, Australia's FSIs have been a slow adopter of cloud, so good segue after yours, Theo. Some organisations are years ahead of others, but many have a lot more to do to capitalise on the benefits of cloud. Moving core to the cloud or building for the cloud seems to be gaining popularity. What are your thoughts on migrating to the cloud or building or buying systems designed for the cloud?
So the first thing I would say is cloud absolutely has to be in your strategy in IT. I mean, when I first started working at CBA, they had their own mailmen inside the organisation. They'd given up the tea ladies by that point, but they had their own mailmen. Now, you have a courier, everything else. So running your own IT, running your own data centres made sense when nobody else was doing it. One of our banking customers, we went to the US to visit one of the hyperscalers, and that hyperscaler had more people involved in security than that bank had in IT. So anybody who suggests to you that, maybe it's not as secure as what we run ourselves, that's wrong. So there's so many of these examples, and if I forget about the big end of town, we've got 3 customers in Australia running our Cloud for Banking product that are all hosted in the cloud. I mean, they don't even know where it sits. They don't need to know. They just want a banking application that works. They don't need to know all the other pieces. They'll tell you how often it needs to be running and when it's allowed to be down and when it's not allowed to be down. And that's all they need to know about the technology, because they're a bank, not a technology company. And I think with anything, if you can specialise in what you do best and get somebody who's better at that, then I think that's the ideal solution. So always look for somebody who's better at doing those things than you are. And it's not without its pain. We're working with one of our larger customers and just trying to figure out how to get the data out of their data centre and into the cloud, over a short shutdown window will be challenging. But it's got to be done. That's what I would say.
I would concur as well. I would also say there's a methodology to get there as well, right? And I usually tell people don't start with core banking, right? Because all banks have a lot of different types of applications in their ecosystem. And if you're newer to the cloud, most banks do have strategies these days, but many of them have not implemented a lot of that strategy yet. So do not start with your core banking system, by the way. Like, let's look at the 500 or 600 different systems that surround that core banking system, or the ancillary systems beyond that. Start with that. Learn from that. Get used to the environment, because it is fundamentally a different environment than what they're used to today. Make that core banking system maybe middle or end of that journey, because I think there's also something you have to think about. We have to be able to scale. And what I haven't seen yet is a full-blown tier 1 banking system running in the cloud that supports 100 million plus accounts, right? I know it's possible. I know we're going to get there, but it's not the first thing you do out of the gate. So again, completely agree, you got to have a cloud strategy. You got to get there, but find your way there slowly. Make the steps you need to take the applications that aren't super critical, get them there, get used to it, get your IT staff understanding who they call, who their contacts are, what the security measures are around that, and then start looking at your core banking system. So the methodology is just as important as the strategy to get there.
Yeah, and on that, one of our customers did move. Well, they had targets to move by servers, and they ended up moving all the easy things, which makes sense. But then 50% of the remaining servers was the core banking system. So, but they did that as well. So yes, makes sense.
Can I have a minute on the cloud? All right. I think with cloud, so I work for FIS, and my baby is to bring our cloud native software as a service cloud solution deployed on the public cloud to market. I think the appetite is there to do that. I totally agree with the comments around starting small. I think a lot of banks over the last 10 years have put a lot of those ancillary systems. I used to work for Salesforce as well, and a lot of banks moved to Salesforce 5, 6, 7 years ago to put on the cloud. I believe banks are ready to move to the cloud. I think Chris made the point. Banks want to focus on banking. They don't want to focus on technology. When we're talking to banks, if the first thing they ask is what's under the hood and how that works, frankly, it's the wrong bank to be talking to about moving to cloud. And to my earlier point around partnership, yeah, it's finding the banks that are there that actually want to move. There are a lot of banks out there that want to move to cloud, and the appetite is there. We're seeing that globally. I agree with Eric's point. Maybe not moving 100 million accounts at this moment in time, but a large number of banks are moving significant volumes to the cloud. And we will see that over the next 2 to 3 years, that you will see banks running 10, 20, 30, 40 million accounts on the cloud.
My question's about cloud and running multi-cloud with, Salesforce and your payment systems and your core banking systems sitting on multiple clouds. I mean, how do you think about running a reliable system across multiple vendors and cloud providers?
I think it's around segregation of what those cloud vendors are actually doing. I mean, if I think of, we'll use the Salesforce and the core example. Delineation of the role of the solution. Say, I'm not here to bash Salesforce, but for example, is Salesforce a CRM system or is it a customer master? And what functions should it be performing, and how should those functions be then working in with the core? If you then look at the core, is the core going to be the master of product? Is the core going to be the master of customer? How those services are exposed out. I mean, these are the things that you need to consider in the overall architecture. I think the role of the core is fundamentally going to be the system of record. It's fundamentally going to own the customer process, the product and pricing process, how those services are exposed out, and then those services around it, albeit that they're going to be deployed on a different cloud, are then going to consume those. I think how we architect those together is difficult. Don't get me wrong, but I think fundamentally it's around looking and deciding around the delineation of what processes sit where.
Just want to add to that. I think when you talk in terms of multi-cloud, it's a reality of today, right? As I said, there's hardly any deployments we're doing which is not multi-cloud. We do integrate into multi-SaaS providers externally, as well as internal sort of platform that's also deployed on proper cloud architecture. So I think it is more the management tools, but also how do you deal with latency and redundancy in a multi-cloud environment? So I said there's a lot of benefits that it brings, but there's also a lot of technology challenges that it brings as well. And it comes back to proper cloud architecture design as well. And I think one of the things that we've learned as well is to make sure that your big cloud providers, whichever you run on, is all get them around the table to actually make sure you actually build a high availability, scalability, but also a robust system that actually can withstand anything that's been thrown at us. The other part is also your management side, is how do you run your management tool set onto it. But at the end of the day, you don't want to run multi-cloud operations. You want a singular tool set or single level to actually run your cloud underneath it. You shouldn't worry about what's underneath it. And I think that's part of the cloud design strategy in terms of management and operational tools to manage to make it successful. But from our perspective, is that is standard going forward, is that you're going to run multi-cloud architectures.